of deadline, particularly Jake, who was right up to it with the up to the last minute. It's quite a tiring thing. So today's an interesting day for us. We apologise that those of you that thought we were going to have this a couple of weeks back, but that was the one reason why we couldn't do it, was simply because we were literally inundated. But it was a fantastic, and we got them all there before the deadline, and well pleased with that. And we now wait to see what the assessors make of those submissions. And we're believing for a great result as a result of that. So yeah, as you can tell, hopefully from my voice, we're very passionate about what we do. We love supporting small businesses. We have clients all over Europe, but each one we treat individually, and we just love the idea that people can be innovative and have great ideas, and often funding is a struggle. And so we particularly use our skill base to help get grant funding, which actually quite a lot of SME organisations don't even realise exists. And when you're working on business development and you're working on new ideas, research is quite a difficult thing, and research and development. And yet there are great ways of being able to fund that. And that's what Jake's going to talk to you about. It's what Matt's asked us to talk about tonight. And by the time we finish, or hopefully you will have a lot more of an idea of what can be done, what's possible. And as I said just now, we would love to be able to support you in any way we can in doing that if it's appropriate. As I said, Moralitas, we are an international company. We're not very large, but we are international.
Is it just me who's lost Adrian?
Sorry?
I can hear him loud and clear.
That's not good, is it? I've lost my co-host.
Oh, okay. You can hear me, or?
You're back now.
Okay.
Sorry, do go on.
That's right. So we're based in the UK in terms of the management. The directors are based in the UK. As I said earlier, we have clients all over Europe. Quite an exciting part of the way we work is we have a team of academic writers that are actually based in Bulawayo in Zimbabwe. It's really important for us as part of our value system, because although I won't go into it, we have a history of being involved in Zimbabwe. But as you probably know, Zimbabwe is a country that has gone through a pretty torrid time in the last 10 years or so. And what we do is very, as I say, exciting and sort of fits why we do what we do, or the way we do it. We have a team of writers. These guys are graduates. The education system in Zimbabwe is the British system. They graduate the same as our university students do here. But sadly, the job situation in Zimbabwe is actually appalling. Nobody really knows what the figures are, but estimates of something between 90 and 95% unemployment in terms of proper employment, rather than sort of the economy of just trying to do things on the side or whatever. So we have a great program. We train these guys from once they get their degree, train them in writing. They come with their own gifting and their own experiences and their own expertise. We train them in writing, and then we work with them and we oversee what they do, and we gradually get them to a point where they're able to write submissions for us. That enables us to reduce the cost, which is important for us, but it is part of our, as I say, moral system, in that we're able to encourage an economy like that. And it's a great team out there. We have more people in Zimbabwe than we have in the UK. But it does obviously mean we are genuinely an international company, but we are not huge. We're small enough to care, as they say, but we have a lot of experience. My background, I don't think my video is working, but my background, I'm a bit older than Jake. I've been involved in business for over 45 years, quite a lot of experience. Jake, as I say, is a bit younger than me, but has been in this world of grant funding and applications for well over 10 years now. Together we make a team with the guys that help us administratively, and obviously the team of writers. So we are looking forward to tonight to hearing any questions you have at the end. I say that because I think it will be easier if Jake does the presentation. I think, Matt, there's a way of asking questions as we go to be written down. Is that right? Is that how it works?
Yeah, there is. I mean, usually the Q&A is at the end, but if anyone wants to kind of write a question as we go, feel free to do so. So there is a tab you can read out the questions at the bottom. Sorry, did you catch that?
Attendees can hear us.
Yeah. Are you back with us, Matt?
Yeah. Sorry, my Zoom crashed.
Oh, great. Okay.
Carry on. I just said that there's a Q&A button where people can chat as we go.
Yeah, so all I was going to say, Matt, if you're happy, I think it would be easier, given the technology and whatever, for Jake to go through the presentation.
Sure.
We answer most of the questions at the end and I can join in with him. But if people want to write them as we go, that would mean that I can have a look at them as we're going through and get an idea of what the questions are.
Yeah, whatever your preference is.
Okay, well, let's do that. And without further ado, I'll hand it over to Jake, who will now tell you in detail what we do and what opportunities there are.
Super. Thank you, Matt. Thank you, Adrian. We're clearly having some connection issues, so I'm going to keep my video off whilst I'm talking to make sure that the slides are still visible and that you don't lose me. Pleasure to be with you all. It's a shame we can't be in a room together and I could see you properly, but hopefully you can hear me, and hopefully we can take you through some helpful information. This is a bit of a repeat of a session we did at WeWork with Matt back in, I think it was February time, so just before lockdown. I'm going to start by talking about what funding is out there. It's worth prefacing that by saying we are at a bit of a crossroads when it comes to innovation funding, particularly on the European side of things. The programme that I'm going to talk a bit about and that we were submitting for yesterday comes to an end at the end of this year. And actually yesterday's call was the last call of the main SME or small business focused part of that. So we are at an interesting stage. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the funding that has gone before in the last few years. We have some information about its replacement, but not everything yet. And the B word, Brexit, does also loom large over the conversation. Because the UK's role still, unbelievably, isn't completely clear. So we have an idea of what it's going to look like, but there are some things which could still change that. So we'll start by just looking at a high level at the different types of funding available. So on the UK side, we have the Innovate UK or UK RI, which are focused on UK companies performing research and development, which is primarily for the benefit of the UK economy. So that there's innovation and grant funding in there, which we'll look at. And Smart Grants is the particular program that we're going to talk about today. There are also then some tax reliefs available, which Matt alluded to. So there's the R&D Tax Relief scheme, which I'm sure most of you have heard of, and there's Patent Box as well. Now, we don't submit these applications ourselves because they are primarily handled by accountants. They're primarily a numbers game with a small accompanying report. But we do have a couple of companies we work with who do this day in, day out. So we hand them our R&D tax credit work and we do their grant funding for them. So if that's an area that you'd like to look at, then we can certainly introduce you to somebody who knows what they're doing. On the European side of it, Horizon 2020, and I think I saw somebody asking about an H2020 call in the Q&A actually. This has been the biggest European funding pot that there has been. So it was around 80 billion euros over the 7 years it's run, with 2020, as the name suggests, being the final year. This is European funding from a central European pot, which all members pay into. It's therefore imperative within this call, or this program, I should say, to be successful, you have to be able to demonstrate a European focus and a European benefit to your project. So how are you doing something which benefits the European community and the European economy? And is it of a scale that is worthy, if you like, of European attention? as I said earlier, this program ends this year. We are now seeing the final few calls of Horizon 2020. And so we are at that crossroads point I mentioned, which we do have every 7 years or so. We have this kind of changeover point. Horizon Europe officially launches in January. Some of the programs are fairly well understood already, and some of them, like the SME scheme, now called the Accelerator scheme, we are still waiting to see exactly what that's going to look like. We have an idea, but it's not confirmed yet. So it's an interesting time. There's also Eurostars, which is funded from a similar pot, but is a slightly different scheme. It's a bit more niche, but if you have European partners, it's very worth looking at Eurostars because it's not as competitive as some of the other schemes. And if your project is a good fit for Eurostars, then you've got a really good chance. That's worth talking about. The funding in these areas obviously varies a little bit, but speaking in broad terms across Accelerator, across Innovate UK, Smarts, you can expect these funding schemes to fund your activity around labour, equipment, materials, and even subcontracting at a rate of around 70%. So this means that in order to go ahead with one of these projects, you need to be able to provide a 30% contribution. But 70% is still obviously an excellent funding rate. As I said, we'll kind of zone in on Smart Grants and Accelerator shortly, but just in case it's relevant for anyone, I'll just give you a little bit of information about the two tax relief schemes that I mentioned. So R&D Tax Relief, or tax credits as it's often referred to. The key thing I'm going to say about this is that the qualification criteria for R&D Tax Relief are broader than most people think they are. So it's worth investigating. If you're doing anything that might be considered research, it's well worth talking to somebody who knows about the scheme and understanding your eligibility, because some people are surprised when they learn that there is actually funds available for them. The two main criteria for eligibility: you have to be making an appreciable improvement to an existing technology. So this is where eligibility for tax relief differs from grant funding. So for grant funding, we'll talk about this, but you need to be groundbreaking, innovative, novel. Actually, for tax relief, you just have to be doing something a bit quicker, a bit faster, a bit cheaper, perhaps, than it's being done currently, or better in some way. It doesn't necessarily need to be completely groundbreaking. And you do need to be overcoming a technological challenge or uncertainty. So the criteria to think about there is that the solution you're providing wouldn't be immediately obvious to another qualified professional. As I said, we do partner with a couple of firms in this area if it's something that you wanted to talk to somebody about. R&D Relief allows you to deduct an extra amount of your qualifying costs from your yearly profit. And actually, if you're loss making, you can also claim some of that surrenderable loss back. So it is a good scheme, and again, unlike grant funding, it's not a competitive scheme. So you don't have to beat the competition to get the tax relief. You just have to qualify. So it's worth looking at. Patent box is the other one we'll look at very quickly. Simply put, the patent box scheme it enables companies to apply a lower rate of corporation tax to the profits that it's earned from its inventions. So you can only benefit from the patent box if you make a profit from exploiting patented inventions. So there's a 10% headline corporation tax rate available for UK companies. You must make a profit from those patent inventions, and you must obviously be liable for corporation tax, or there's nothing to reduce. Again, if that's something you want to know more about, then do let us know and we can introduce you to somebody. But if it's okay, I'll just jump on to the much more interesting areas of grant funding. So the EIC Accelerator scheme under Horizon 2020, you may have heard of the SME instrument, which was the the forerunner for the accelerator, and it's been the SME or small business focused arm of Horizon 2020. Its aim is to support high risk and high potential SMEs. Typically, it wants small businesses who can't just go and get investment because they're doing something that's inherently worth funding. It's too risky for the market, or it has too many technical challenges that need to be overcome, and so it needs grant funding to help it get there. It's looking to develop and bring to market new innovative products, services and business models. I mentioned this a moment ago, but it is worth noting that within this area, the projects must have a clear European dimension in order to be successful. So if you're applying for one of these European calls as a UK company, assuming we're still eligible from next year, which I think we will be, but who knows, you need to have an understanding of where in the European market you can have an impact beyond your country of origin. And it might also mean that you're saying, actually, we can get there ahead of someone else. The EC particularly likes anyone who wants to try and bring something into Europe before someone does it in Silicon Valley or in the Far East. This call obviously is a bigger challenge at the moment for UK companies, and so we are keeping an eye on that, and our focus at the moment is very much on the UK funding, particularly for the next 3 or 4 months. Fundable activities within this call can include trials, prototyping, validation, demonstration, and testing. It's been a good scheme. It's funded lots of interesting projects, but it is also very competitive, and so it's worth bearing that in mind when you're evaluating your options. In terms of the scale, projects receive between €500,000 and €2.5 million in the form of grants. They're usually 1 to 2 year projects, and the funding is 70% of all eligible costs. So it is a very good funding rate. And those eligible costs include those things I mentioned earlier, but also an indirect cost or an overhead rate as well, and subcontracting. So it's a well-funded scheme. From June last year, they also changed the scheme to include an equity option. So if you're looking to complete certain research and development tasks, but actually go beyond that into commercialisation, previously that wasn't an option with this scheme, whereas they changed it to say, actually, if you want to do that now, you can, but you'll need to ask us for equity. So they began investing in projects as well, and even allowing the equity to be used to cover the 30% co-contribution, which did unlock that opportunity for some people who wouldn't have been able to do it otherwise. We're obviously keeping questions to the end, but just at that point at the end of the accelerator slides, Adrian, Matt, are there any questions that we need to respond to?
There's no written questions at the moment that are specifically to do with the European accelerators, so I would think it's probably keep going. Jay, I've suggested they hold on to the end. I'm looking at them as we go, and so if I feel there's anything that's really crucial, I'll say.
Okay, super. Thank you. So there's some broad information on the accelerator. This is going to change a little bit when Horizon Europe kicks off within the next couple of months. But as soon as we have more information, we'll certainly be feeding it through to Matt, so he can share it with anyone who's interested in that, or I'm sure our contact details can be made available as well if you have any questions. Moving on then to Innovate UK Smart Grants. Within the Innovate UK funding programme, there are a wide range of very specific calls and opportunities available in a range of technical areas. So these include things, for example, like green energy or electric vehicles, medtech, aerospace, cybersecurity, those sorts of areas. So they are quite specific. What we're talking about now is the Smart Grant, which is the open call. So that means it doesn't prejudice according to subject matter. They just have pot of money which they want to invest in the most ambitious or disruptive projects that they can. So each call, and there are usually 4 calls a year, although this year there have only been 3, because there was one due in the middle of lockdown, which they kind of paused and rolled it over to the current call. So that means there's a call open at the moment, which we're currently working on a couple of projects for, but still taking new projects on as well. And what they're looking to fund within the Smart Grant call, in a as brief a way as possible, is those 3 areas. So they want game-changing innovations, disruptive ideas that are commercially viable. So if you've got an incremental improvement on something within your industry, and you think it's going to add 5% to your bottom line, but no one else is going to use it, that probably isn't game changing. It's probably not disruptive. It's probably a great idea for you to do, but it's not something that Innovate UK are likely to want to fund. So they are looking for ambitious companies who have come up with something that's going to disrupt the marketplace and disrupt how things are being done currently. And commercially viable is really important as well. So this isn't an academic exercise. They're not looking to fund research for the sake of research. They want companies who've got clear evidence-based plans for how they're going to deliver a significant economic impact. The return on investment is really important to Innovate UK. They want to know that they are investing their money wisely. It's worth noting, I mentioned that the current call is open. It's the August call, and then the deadline is the 25th of November. So that is the final deadline of this year. And Smart Grant, the way Innovate UK work is they don't publish all of their deadlines ahead of time. You just have to keep an eye out. But we would expect the next call to be published perhaps mid-December, maybe pushing into January. But they don't usually leave long between calls, and then you have a 3-month window. So it's worth looking at that. If you're here with an idea and want to talk about it, we are available to talk about applications for that deadline. In terms of how those projects work, there are 2 different ways of doing it. You can apply as a single applicant, or you can put together a collaborative project with other partners, which can include academics if that's appropriate to your project. As a single applicant, your project needs to be between 6 and 18 months in duration. Your total project costs need to be less than £500,000. And the funding, assuming you're in the right category, which I'll look at shortly, is again at 70%. So again, it's a good funding rate. If you're in line for a collaborative project, then they're allowed to be a bit longer, a bit bigger, but the funding for the SMEs is still the same. So it's worth looking at those. In terms of the research categories, the areas we find fit really well with Smart Grant are the 2 that I've highlighted there. So these are feasibility and industrial research. So this means a project where you're analysing or evaluating the potential within a project, or perhaps conducting some planned research or some critical investigation to try and uncover some new knowledge or skills which you don't have yet. This can be for brand new things that aren't currently around, but actually industrial research fits really well if you're looking at improving or drastically improving a particular existing process or system or product. So that's where it can be really helpful. So if you have a system which is in your industry at the moment, which is how everyone does it, and you've thought of a way of improving that significantly enough that it's going to be disruptive, that would fit that industrial research category. And as you can imagine, I find that most small businesses aren't that interested in experimental development as soon as they see the funding rate is 45%. So I'm sure that will be the case here. It makes it quite an expensive project. In terms of the business side, micro or small there means sub 10 million turnover and sub 50 employees. Medium means sub 250 employees and 50 million. But most people who are looking at projects as single applicants, sub 500,000, they are typically sub 10 million turnover. But yes, if you're above that threshold, obviously the funding rate is slightly less. So that's smart grants. Again, if there's any question on that specifically, I'm sure Adrian will interrupt me, so I shall plough on. When we spoke to Matt before, there's a couple of things we discussed including, and one of those was just to try and give an idea or a sense of what these funding authorities are actually looking to fund. What sort of projects are they interested in? Now, whilst there are definite differences to consider between the different funding authorities and the different calls, there are some common factors that it's well worth keeping in mind. So there's 5 things I've picked out here that I think are the most important. And if you could see the banners behind me, it would reflect it as well. So the first one is innovation. So that this is the common theme across. You can see it on the background of the slide. Is there real novelty in what you're proposing? Why are you the right people to do it over your competitors? Is it going to disrupt? Is it ahead of the competition? Or is it just a nice idea? And this is one of the things we do. We run workshops with prospective new projects before we take anything on. And one of the things we talk about a lot is there real innovation in what you're proposing? It's perfectly possible to have a great idea with a great business plan that is well worth some money to get off the ground. But that doesn't necessarily mean it's innovative. It doesn't necessarily mean grant funding is the right option for you. So it isn't saying that there aren't many business plans that are well worth executing. It's just saying that to qualify for grant funding, innovation is really key. The market. So can you demonstrate you've got a good understanding of the market opportunity or the demand? So if you're looking at a European application, for instance, do you have some understanding of where it's going to go? That doesn't mean you can't conduct certain elements of market research or investigation as part of the funded project, but you need to have a starting point where you understand there is an opportunity. And that kind of comes down to the technology readiness level, which I'll come on to shortly. Third thing, the benefits. So have you, or are you able to clearly articulate the benefits of your technology? And actually, does this tie in with what the funding authority or the funding scheme is looking to fund? And it's a key mistake that quite a lot of people make across different types of funding. So even things like tenders, public sector funding. Actually, if you haven't considered what the scheme is there to achieve and made sure that you can tie in with that, then you're less likely to be successful. Fourthly, impact, and we've touched on this really, but can you quantify the impact that you would have if offered funding? Return on investment is a really big thing with all of these schemes. They want to see that you've thought about it and that you can demonstrate that there's a return there to be achieved. So if they are investing, if you're asking UK PLC to give you £250,000, what's UK PLC getting back for that investment? And finally, TRL or technology readiness level. So are you at the right stage of development for the funding you're asking for? Different funds want different stages of development. So going in with a project that is ready for commercialisation is not a good fit for Smart Grant, because if it's ready for commercialisation, then you should just be getting on with that. That suggests you haven't got any of those earlier stage bits of work to do or those technical challenges still to overcome. I've included a quick slide on technology readiness level. I'm sure most people are familiar with it, but it might be helpful for some. This isn't a unique thing for EC funding, but it's a helpful scale to kind of consider your development against. To be honest, if you're between TRL 4 and 6, then deciding where you fit can be a bit subjective. So two people might look at it slightly differently from each other. But most SME focused, close to market funding, but still needing to overcome a technical challenge like Smart Grant, is looking for you to be around TRL 5 or 6. Too early, and there isn't enough there to go on, and too late, and you don't really need the funding. So TRL 5 and 6 is the place to be. So having validated or demonstrated what you're trying to do in some way, perhaps just beyond that kind of lab stage, but actually being able to prove that you've tested it enough, that you have a fair idea, but that you still have some technical challenges to overcome. The problem with being too early stage is that you may not yet know what all the technical challenges are, and so you need to have a good understanding of that in order to have a good chance. I hope that will make sense. The final thing from me, and possibly the most helpful, is just to say, what does a winning application look like? So we've looked at what they're looking to fund, but actually how do you convince them? How do you get over the line? And for me, from my experience of doing this, and since launching Moralitas as well as the last 10 years, there are still 5 things that seem to always come up when I'm reviewing applications. So the first one is it has to have a compelling storyline. I think lots of people think that it's a science for how you achieve funding. I usually say it's an art, and there's a narrative storytelling element to it. As much as the subject matter can be quite technical, you still need to provide a compelling storyline to the assessor. And across every type of funding application, the evaluators are busy people with lots of applications to review, but they're humans, and they care, and they're engaged, and they like stories. So this means if you haven't taken the time to craft the most compelling storyline, even the strongest concept that hasn't hooked the evaluator in with that storyline won't be successful. To do this, you have to establish before you begin writing what the arguments for funding are. So we usually do this as a 1 or 2 page document where we say, this is why, these are the 5 reasons why this application is worthy of funding. And you then have to build those into the proposal, presenting the document well as you go, to ensure that it's engaging and an attractive read where possible. So that's number 1, and it's, for me, that's number 1 for a reason as well. I think others might tell you that the technical side of it is more important, but in my view, until these applications are actually evaluated by a computer, the storyline is always going to be really key. Secondly, you need to clearly articulate the benefits and impacts. So on the company, in terms of return on investment, profitability post commercialising, but also on the wider economy of the UK or Europe, depending on the funding scheme you're looking at. Thirdly, you having an excellent management team is a really big plus. So the old adage that you'll all have heard from investors is that they would always rather back an excellent team with a good idea than vice versa. And I think evaluators of applications are quite similar. So we often see that a great idea with a team who don't have the track record or the qualifications or the experience to take it home don't do as well. So having an excellent management team is really key. Fourthly, and I promise this is the last time I use the word innovation, because I'm sure you've all heard it enough now, but clear innovation is really, really important. What technical challenge are you overcoming? How are you demonstrably ahead of, or at least before, the competition? Why should the UK or the EU want to fund you? and that's really key. And fifthly, it speaks to the funding bodies authorities, and this is really key, and I touched on this a moment ago, but when approaching a funding application, a bid, a public sector tender, many companies, I would say most companies, and even some people who write applications for a living will focus on themselves first of all. So their starting point will be, what are my USPs? And what that means is that when the evaluator reads that, they get a long list of USPs from everybody, and they start to sound very ununique. It's therefore vitally important to take the time when you're putting these things together to understand the individual funding authority and what they are looking to achieve or fund, and to then make sure your application lines up with those priorities. So those are my kind of top 5 what does a winning application look like tips. The bottom line of all this is that we're asking for public funds, so we need to make a really strong case for why we are deserving of that investment. And I think doing that is really a combination of those 5 factors. So that's all of the downloading done.
Jake, shall I just pick it up for a minute? I think thanks very much for that. It's really helpful. I've got a few questions. None of them, I felt all of them we could wait till the end, so that's why we didn't interrupt you. I think the key thing, just to reiterate, is that Moralitas as an organisation, when Jake just gave that his 5 points as to a winning pitch, all these grants applications can be made by an individual without an organisation such as Moralitas with them. We don't actually make applications, we assist you in making an application. I think when you look at those 5 points, that's where the skill is. The skill is knowing over the years of what actually works and what doesn't, and making sure that you don't make the classic mistakes which many people do. Hindsight is a wonderful thing, as they say. What we've done is we've learned through experience. You can gain that experience by submitting and failing and submitting and failing and submitting and succeeding, submitting and succeeding. We're much more successful with our percentage of achievements than an individual's or the overall percentage. But that's because we have learned these lessons, and that's what we do. So that's one of the outsourcing elements of Moralitas, and you can see from the presentation tonight that Jake and the team do really know what they're talking about. So Jake, can we just pick a few of these questions? Is that okay?
Yeah, absolutely.
I think some of them we can answer, you've answered, but we'll just go through them. The first one was about starting an application for a deadline on the 27th of October. Actually, the question that I don't think you heard, Jake, possibly, the deadline was the 7th, not the 27th.
There are other EC calls still open, so it might.
Okay, I was going to say, that's what I was going to say, unless there's something else that we weren't referring to. So,
yeah, I think, yeah, I mean, certainly an hour ago would have been a good time to ask that one, because we might have had to start writing soon. It does depend on the call. Is the person who asked that still around and able to just?
Christian, are you there?
Call that is.
Matt, is he able to? Are they able to speak to us?
No, they can't speak. They can type.
Okay, so Christian, do you want? We're waiting for you to just respond. Ah, okay. So yes, he can. I assume he can hear you. Jake, do you want to answer it? And what's it? I'll look for a question.
Yeah, I think my question is which call are you looking at that has that deadline? Most of the time, and it varies obviously depending on the type of application, but most of the time we're looking at least a 4-week process, quite often a 6-week process to do it in the way we'd like to. That said, for the accelerator deadline yesterday, we had one very late application which we actually turned around in 3 weeks. So we can move quite quickly if required. Without knowing which call it is and what type of application it is, I probably can't.
So according to the response, it's an FTI grant, EU grant.
Okay, so yeah, an FTI is is similar in scope to the accelerator. So I'm happy to speak to that person, but it would probably need to be tomorrow morning in order to have a look at whether that's doable. It depends what their starting point is, whether they've submitted anything previously, whether their partners are already in place, etc., etc. So it's a
Matt.
It'll be a challenge to do in 3 weeks, but we've done more in less time before. But it's just not ideal.
We can have a look at it tomorrow. Matt, we've got Moses also asking a similar question. How do you want them to make contact with us?
I guess we can pass your details over directly in the chat, and they can reach out direct.
Okay, so
that's the best way. Yeah.
So Christian, that's the answer. If you want to contact Jake tomorrow, you'll have the information shortly. Be good, or send an email tonight, or whatever. You guys can talk about that. Moses, that's the same answer to your question as well. Okay, next question is about how we get paid as an organisation. We do charge a fee. There are lots of different ways of doing this, and there are other organisations out there do what we do. We work on a model that says we charge less than most, because we want to partner with you in getting this successful application. So the way it works is we charge an initial fee. It will depend on the application. It would depend on the call. It would depend. So some of them, it might be a 20-page submission. It might be an 80-page submission. So we would obviously charge differently. To give you an idea, a UK Smart Grant, our initial fee is around about £5,000. And then what we do to get the total amount we would normally charge is we share with you in the success fee when it's funded. So we believe in what we do. We obviously don't have 100% success, but we believe in what we do, and that's how how our business model works. So usually that fee, as I say, is around that £5,000 mark. The actual shared success and support fee that we agree depends on the size of the grant, but it's probably around about 5% of the figure of the grant awarded. So that's how we operate there. I don't know who that was, but that's the answer to that question. Next one, Jake, specifically R&D credits on a startup. What's the actual? I mean, obviously you have to fit the criteria. I don't know. Point of startup, I guess it's a point of when you get to a point when you've paid your first lot of corporation tax.
Yes. If you haven't paid anything, then there's nothing to get back. Is the first answer there? Is that a question about R&D tax credits or?
Yeah.
Okay. So yeah. I think the bottom line there is it's tax relief. So if you haven't paid anything yet, then there's nothing to give.
But as soon as if you pay tax in the first year, corporation tax, then you can start it in the second year. But obviously,
absolutely. And the scheme allows you to kind of back claim for a couple of years as well, which is quite helpful. Okay.
The next one, most of these are anonymous, but the next one was about, I think we've answered. It's saying the question is how difficult is it to get funded EIC funding, and when's the deadline? I think you've now answered that, but just to be clear, we don't know what the next deadline is. The last deadline was yesterday for the year, so it will be next year, but we're waiting to hear.
I'd say as of today, it's very, very difficult to get funding because there aren't any.
Yes, exactly. There's no call.
It's almost impossible, in fact.
But obviously, once the call is announced, then as long as you fulfill the kind of criteria that Jake's outlined, then the answer to that is yes, it's difficult, but that's what we're here for, to help you do it. Another one is Innovate UK R&D grant application. I don't quite understand this one. For me, for development of an application and website meets the rest of the criteria. I'm assuming that the question is that you believe you do meet the rest of the criteria and you're applying for.
I think I can answer that one, Adrian.
Can you? Okay, cool.
Yeah, I think if I've followed the question, and do write another question if I've not, but software projects, developing apps, etc., are not ineligible. So there are software projects that get funded. We've had some funded recently, provided it's innovative and it's disruptive and it's game changing, etc. So the the challenge often with software applications is that the technical challenge in getting from A to B in a software development environment, it's difficult to prove innovation in that environment, because actually there are usually 100 different ways of getting from A to B. So it comes down to the innovation in the business model or measuring the impact it's going to have. So I think software is a big area that has lots of funding thrown at it. So it's certainly viable, but it comes down to how we're building the argument, what the impact of that project is going to be. Because doing, performing some software development in a way that's different from the person next door in and of itself isn't innovative enough because of the nature of development. So I hope that makes sense.
Can I just comment, Jay? I think one of the things we do, which is probably for everybody here to hear, is that we when we get a project that we feel that we need to unpack more, we need to get into more detail, what we do is, rather than go straight to a writing of application, we run what we call a concept development workshop. This is a much cheaper doorway in, if you like. And what happens is, normally Jake and I spend 2-3 hours either, what it used to be obviously face-to-face, now it's on Zoom, trying to unpack that and trying to work out. And one of the key things of that is exactly what you're saying, Jake, isn't it? Is that we need to prove the innovation. And if we feel that you can't, then we would not want to advise you to go spending money on an application that we don't feel confident in. Obviously you could do that on your own, but our advice to you would be not to do that. But that's a good thing we can talk about. If anyone was interested in booking, we'd have to take it further with you, but we would ultimately then suggest we specifically have a workshop for you and for your idea.
Yeah, it might be worth us just sharing a link to the concept development workshop flyer here within the chat, so that if you want to have a look at that, you can do. But yeah, I think software is definitely an interesting area, in that demonstrating innovation in software is notoriously difficult to do.
It's probably the hardest one, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. Protecting software, as most people know, is difficult, because actually the route you've taken to achieve what you've achieved is almost subjective. There are just so many different ways of doing it.
Just to say, one of the hardest things we do is, because everybody thinks their idea is innovative, is the hardest thing we have to do is to tell people that it's not innovative enough. But that's obviously something about how we go. There's quite a few questions coming in, so I'm going to move on, if I may, Jake. Yeah. The question I think you've answered is, for an EIC Accelerator, is it a must to have a European partner firm to apply? The answer to that you've answered, I think, which is that it has to be European, and there are two levels. One level is if you've got partners, and the other if you haven't. Is that right?
Yeah. For an FDI,
yeah.
Yes, yeah.
I think you answered it. It was written before you said it. So, in
simple terms, yes. You need to have some European involvement, particularly right now.
So another good question here. It's an interesting one. You mentioned, Jake, that it was necessary to have a great management team. What happens if you're the sole founder and you don't have a team with you at this point?
Yeah, good question. It depends what you're asking for funding for, I guess. So if you're asking for funding of a scale of 150, 200, 250,000 pounds to do some activity, then you're going to need people to deliver that, and you're going to need to say who those people are going to be and what they're going to cost. So you won't be able to realistically complete a grant-funded project on your own. So you would need to include people. If you're applying for a small amount of funding and you're the technical lead and a technical expert, then you are the management team. So it does come down to the founder often, but in order to justify grant funding, you're going to need to explain what work you're doing and who's doing it as well.
And it's also difficult if you're backing one person, because obviously it's so dependent on that person, isn't it?
Yeah.
which is better if you're seeing that it's spread. Okay, some of the other questions or answers or things that are coming through, we've already answered or about, yes, they want to chat with you tomorrow. The final one is on our charges. The question is, the £5,000 which we charge, is it up front or will it be paid when the grant has been won? The simple answer to that is yes, it is up front. We don't do it in one lump. But it needs to be paid before the submission is made, which is why we say the full payment charge that we would make would include our percentage of the success fee as a success fee, which is what we, as it were, share the risk with you. But obviously bearing in mind that, say for instance, with a UK Smart Grant, you need to be able to have 30% of what it is you're applying for anyway before you can apply. Otherwise, that has to be proven in your submission. I don't know if you want to add anything to that, Jake, but I think that's probably right, isn't it?
Yeah, I think you need to know where you're getting your 30% from. So
yeah.
You don't have to have it in the bank in advance, but you need to be able to think about that and think about how you're going to cash flow the project, because the first period is typically completed before you've got the grant funding in the bank. So the cash flow just needs to be worked out.
But the way it works is you do the work and then you get paid for doing it rather than you get paid before you do it. That's fundamentally the way the grant works.
Yeah.
So if you don't have that, it's very hard to work that through. So, okay, Matt, we've answered all the questions, I think. Nobody else is screaming saying we haven't. Jake's just putting up link to the concept development workshop. You're going to put our contact details there. Where would you like to go with now, Matt?
I just, if you can put your contact details into the chat, anyone who's interested in following up can follow up directly. And you've put a link to the slides as well?
I haven't done that yet, no, but
okay.
Yeah, we certainly can. What I've put up there is a link to the workshop flyer. So the workshop that Adrian mentioned.
Fantastic. If anybody needs a recording, if anybody needs a recording, just pop a message to your project manager and we can get that to you.
Right.
But thanks very much, Jacob and Adrian. Appreciate it.
Pleasure. Good to meet you all. Sorry it's not in real life with pizzas and beer.
Yeah.
Brilliant. Thanks for listening, guys.
Great. Thanks everyone. Take care. Bye-bye.